Hi, my name is Maddie Morris, and I'm a current sophomore at Vanguard University of Southern California, studying history and political science. Today, we are going to be exploring the North Korean film industry, specifically its origin, its evolution, and where it stands present day 2024. Although the North Korean film industry is immensely underrepresented, they have a really unique and fascinating history that I'm excited to share with you all. First and foremost, I want to go over the table of contents and give a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So, we're going to start off with the origin of the industry, followed by the evolution, looking specifically at how it's developed and progressed over the decades, then taking a closer look at the present day industry, followed by globalization, where we're going to highlight and analyze how their films have been viewed on an international scale. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the streaming platforms and rating systems used in North Korea. To truly understand the origin of the North Korean film industry, it's really important to acknowledge the initial motive behind its creation. Film as propaganda was honestly the initial drive to kickstart any sort of industry in North Korea. And the initial persuasion to use this medium of film for propaganda was instigated by no other than the USSR, who had a very evident financial relationship and investment in the early development of North Korea. The relationship between the USSR and North Korea was quite honestly an interesting mix of political alignment and strategic interests. Looking back to the Cold War era, North Korea looked to the Soviet Union as one of its main allies. So the USSR provided immense economic aid, military support, and ideological backing to North Korea, helping Kim Il sung establish and maintain his regime. This support was crucial for North Korea's development, especially in terms of industrialization and military buildup, but in this context, more importantly, for the culture. In the early and mid 1900s, Stalin and Lenin had a significant impact on the communist ideology that would soon pollute what would later become North Korea. The USSR heavily emphasized the use of propaganda for personal gain, but it wasn't until 1948 that the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, also referred to as the DPRK, was established, but their governmental system was already deeply rooted in communism, arguably because of this long, enduring relationship that they had with the USSR. So, like I said, the film industry was initially utilized to promote communist ideals and prop up the perception of this very young and new government. This perspective and approach to film was extremely restrictive in terms of creative liberties and arguably took away from the art of film. Creators and directors lacked the ability to express themselves in the early years of the establishment of the DPRK because they were attempting to heavily emphasize and meet this agenda of communist ideals through film. The initial goal was always propaganda, and they worked to influence and manipulate rather than create something of quality and good intention. However, film was an extremely effective manner in doing so, and you could see that highlighted in the production of North Korea's very first film that was released just 1 year after the establishment of the DPRK in 1949, and this film was titled My Home Village. So, My Home Village was a film that portrayed the liberation of Korea from Japanese colonial rule just 4 years before this movie actually was produced, and it attempted to create a sense of national identity for North Korea and establish a sense of national pride that this country did not necessarily embody quite yet. However, it was important to note that this movie actually accepted full Soviet funding, and this funding ultimately kickstarted their entire film industry, which really explains why they had to follow through with the use of propaganda throughout their films and why they continued to emphasize these ideals throughout the entire development of their industry. Moving forward to the evolution of the North Korean film industry, it's interesting to analyze the early 1950s, where American influence truly took the stage in North Korea. And a lot of American films and shorts were at the basis of the North Korean film industry, which you could probably see why that would be an issue or why that would be ironic because the American ideals significantly clash with those of North Korea. So, this shift towards communism, um, North Korean officials quickly leaned away from American films because, like I said, it completely challenged their ideologies and what they had been working so hard to promote. So, when Kim Jong il came to power, he had a very clear and distinct vision for North Korean film. He was arguably envious of his South Korean neighbors, who had a booming, successful film industry, and decided that the only reasonable way to develop such a successful industry in his own country would be to kidnap the ones that made it so great. So, in the second picture here, you can see Shin Sang-ok and Cho Yoon-hee, both very well known entertainers in South Korea. And at the time, they were married because Yoon Hee had been a part of many of the films Sang Ok directed. Shin Sang Ok was a highly acclaimed South Korean filmmaker known for his contributions to the industry during the 1950s and the 1960s. Choi Yoon Hee was one of South Korea's most popular actresses during the same time frame of the 50s and the 60s, and starred in numerous films and gained widespread recognition for her talent and her beauty. And in 1978, Shin and his wife were abducted by agents of North Korean leader Kim Jong il, and this kidnapping actually became a notorious event in both the history of South Korean cinema and North Korean cinema. So, the motive behind this kidnapping was reportedly Kim Jong il's desire to enhance the North Korean film industry. The two were forced to make films for the North Korean regime, and they eventually escaped in 1986 while they were attending a film festival in Austria. Their escape gained immense international attention and added to the intrigue surrounding North Korea. The couple's story has been the subject of various documentaries, books, and films, and all of these are shedding light on the oppressive nature of North Korea and its manipulation of individuals for political purposes. Despite the circumstances of their captivity, Shin Sang-ok and Choi Yoon-hee managed to make several films in North Korea, including Pulgasari, which you can see here on the very right, and this was released in 1985 and was a monster movie very similar and comparable to Godzilla. You can kind of see in the flyer there Pulgasari, the character on the left. And the story of Pulgasari is set in feudal Korea, where a cruel and king exploits his peasants, forcing them to surrender their metal tools so that they can be melted down to create weapons for the king's army. And Pulgasari, this monster, eats the metal and grows larger and stronger each time. As Pulgasari grows, he becomes a symbol of resistance against the tyrannical king. And with Pulgasari's help, the peasants rise up against their oppressors and fight for their freedom. Pulgasari is notable for its unique blend of traditional Korean folklore and socialist ideology, and expresses themes of oppression, rebellion, and the power of the people. Despite its origin as a propaganda film commissioned by the North Korean government, Pulgasari gained international attention because of its intriguing backstory revolving the kidnapping. And because it was produced so poorly, the film did not necessarily make a profit nor reach mass international audiences, or at least reach the international audience for the right reason. And its message, looking back, was honestly rather hypocritical and ironic, considering that the people of North Korea are the ones who are oppressed. Moving forward to present day, the present day film industry is still very influenced by propaganda, but now people would consider it to be unsubtle, which I personally thought was a strange way to describe it. But I would argue it's more unsubtle for those viewers outside of North Korea, but for those who only stream North Korean films and are very well acquainted with them, they're arguably blind to the manipulation that's displayed through this film. So it's a clearer vision of propaganda for those who experience a vast range of movies in their day to day. Female roles are typically very minimal, and women are overly sexualized. They never really hold a lead role, let alone a significant side character role, which I think attests to the lack of progression in their culture and beliefs. So a lot of their movies hold very high sexist ideals. They have also begun to prioritize television more than film, and I think this is because it's a smaller investment and it's consumed more by their audiences compared to the films that they produce. So it leads to a better financial return. There is an immense lack of investment into the industry, which shows in their production numbers. So they only produce around 60 films annually compared to Hollywood's 450 films. So I think that North Korea does not prioritize film because they don't see and appreciate the art behind it, rather abuse it for personal motives, which makes sense why they haven't experienced any sort of successes. And they only make approximately 893 million, which again is nothing compared to the larger international industries. And this lack of profit truly comes down to globalization and international audiences, or more so, the lack of. So, moving forward to globalization, like I said, there's really a lack of any international audience, and North Korea does hold a international film festival in their capital, Pyongyang, and they struggle to obtain any international participation, which honestly fully defeats the entire purpose of an international film industry. But as you can imagine, North Korea obviously wins a majority of these awards with because they don't really have any other sort of participation. And I think it really comes down to other international industries not wanting to participate nor support a communist country. And they also acknowledge the dangers of being a part of this film festival. So I think that it serves as a large deterrent for participation. North Korea lacks international presence for a couple reasons, but I was able to narrow it down to two main causes, which I think are the main catalysts for this. And it would be the use of communist ideals within their films, as well as the lack of quality of their films. Similar to what I was discussing earlier, a lot of these movies have extremely unsubtle and underlying propaganda, which makes it not only not enjoyable to watch, but compared to the films we see that come out of Hollywood, um, they are so low in quality and very poorly directed. And when you look into the actors and actresses in North Korea, there's not one prominent figure that necessarily stands out. But there was one that I found to be interesting, his name being James Joseph Dresnok, and he was actually an American defector of the war and sided with North Korea, fighting against his country, and then became a notable actor. He lived in North Korea for a large majority of his life and took on roles as a white American villain, which is ironic because at one point he was the white American villain. So it was fascinating to see that North Koreans took a large interest into films that he was a part of, and he was somewhat praised in the film industry. And moving on to the film rating and streaming platforms. So in North Korea, they obviously have a great deal of censorship, which makes their streaming platforms very limited. The main platform that I could find was Shiwani, and this streams a majority of their television and movies. These are obviously heavily regulated by their government and approved, so you cannot find any international shows or film on this platform. And I put YouTube up here because although YouTube is not allowed in North Korea, you can still stream North Korean films. Say in America here, you can find some of the North Korean films, not completely all the way through and they're lacking quality, but you can find small snippets of it. YouTube, however, in North Korea is not accessible, and similar to like Amazon Prime or HBO, all of these platforms that you would find in a lot of the major countries are not available for North Korean citizens. And the rating system is very similar to South Korea, although North Korea uses their own standards on what they determine to be appropriate. So that's where the variance lies between that. But if you look at the breakdown, it starts from all to 12 to 15 to 18. And so the difference between these is just the level of crude humor, sexual activity, drugs, anything of that nature. But truly, North Korean films never truly endorse this behavior. So this film rating system wouldn't necessarily be comparable to what you see here in the States. And the last one on the very right, that white marking, stands for restrictive. So nobody can watch the films if you do not meet the age requirement. So even with a accompanied adult, you would not be able to watch that film. So the rating system is pretty similar to what we've seen in other countries, but like I mentioned, their standards are significantly different to what they would consider to be appropriate. And last but not least, the conclusion and predictions for the North Korean film industry. Their industry has honestly been pretty stagnant with no evident incline or hope for a booming industry. The end goal and mission of promoting propaganda throughout their history has been a key contributor to the decline in their film. I wouldn't predict any significant change unless there was a shift in ideology, which is also immensely unrealistic. And although there was a hope and urge to push for a successful film industry, it is no longer at the forefront of their prioritization, and followed by the lack of investment that they put into these films, the North Korean film industry will continue to be unsuccessful. So thank you again for joining me and working through this exploration of the North Korean film industry, and I hope you enjoyed.